I want to welcome you to the Downtown Partnership's Do the Local Motion program and the USF Department of History in the line of duty, a walk through downtown Tampa's memorials, service memorials. Again, my name is Steve. I'll be your guide this afternoon.
My name is Ron Arbisi. I'll be your guide for this group. Before we start walking, I want to say a little bit about the monuments and memorials that I hope will enable you to see them a little bit differently. There are a lot of types of memorials, there are a lot of types of monuments, there's a lot of types of service, there are a lot of types of heroes. But only in the services, in the military and the police, is it understood from the very outset that you may very well lose your life in the performance of this job. There are a lot of dangerous jobs. There are coal miners, there are firefighters, there are many jobs that carry risk. I take nothing away from any of them.
We know what's happened in Boston. We know what happened in Waco, Texas, where I think the news report was today that 3 volunteer firemen were killed in the explosion. So there are certainly dangerous occupations out there.
But in them, risk is a possibility. In the services, risk is a certainty. It is a certainty, and that is what this certainty of risk of death is what makes the services different from all of the other risky occupations that one can do.
This is why soldiers and their civilian counterparts, the police, appear so frequently on public memorials, no matter the country, no matter the political system.
Service monuments and memorials are some of the very oldest and most unchanging artifacts of culture.
There's really no difference between the military memorials of Caesar's Rome, the memorials of France, and the memorials of the United States. Memorials generally tend to look the same from country to country.
They look the same. And they should, because they do the same job. So what does society offer those people who are willing to undertake this risk? What it offers them is a deal that goes something like this. In this job, you may lose your life. In recognition of that, if that happens, your name and your deeds will be enshrined and memorialized forever.
And this is a contract between public servants and society. Cultural immortality in return for death in service. So when you serve for the society, there is a possibility that you may lose your life. In return for this sacrifice, the society promises you official immortality. Your name, the record of your service, your actions. Service memorials represent society upholding this contract between the individual and that society. And what we're doing with memorials is keeping alive the name and memory of the men and women who sacrificed themselves. And we'll see that with a number of the sites that we visit today are permanently etched into history's landscape. So, without further ado, let's go to our first stop. If you would, follow me, please.
Yes.
Okay, so the first stop, after such a long walk, obviously, is the TPD Memorial. And really the theme you want to think about here are memorials to first responders. This memorial was dedicated in 1997 by an artist by the name of Mrs. J.J. Watts. If you'll notice, this cutout negative image emphasizes an officer's absence. It was carved specifically to be non-gendered. And shortly after its dedication, a female officer was killed in the line of duty. So there's certainly a poignant reminder and a poignant message to be seen with this particular memorial. It allows the values of honorable service to show through from the back. And you can see through the cutout image, there's an inscription, lost in the line of duty, united in honor. The artist's preference was for it to be placed in Gaslight Park. But the TPD felt it would be better placed here in front of the police headquarters so that officers coming in and out would be reminded daily of those of their fellow brethren, their fellow members of the TPD who have been given and have given their lives in the line of service. You also notice too that this particular memorial is more equal, it's democratic, it's forward-looking. It's a very progressive monument.
In 1975, Detective Sergeant Richard Cloud, the kind of police officer you see in movies, super cop, will not stop, will not be bought, will not be dissuaded. And when they finally became convinced that he would not quit and that he would not stop, the local mob had him killed. He was killed by an assassin in his front door in 1975. And then the killers were rounded up. 2 of the 3 mysteriously committed suicide in jail. And the 3rd one was finally executed. There are other dangerous jobs. There are no other jobs where people make it their mission to hunt you down. Okay, but this is the kind of thing that a police officer or a military member does have to deal with. It's what makes them different. It's what makes them unique. and it's what makes them worthy of a debt of honor from all of the citizens who can go about and live their lives without having to worry about those things.
If you want another, a good image of it, there is in your brochure on the left inside panel a picture of it with a poem that I'm going to read out loud. It's actually the poem that you have in your brochure is inscribed on the back of the memorial. I never dreamed it would be me, my name for all eternity. Recorded here at this hollow place, alas my name, no more my fate. In the line of duty I hear them say, my family now the price will pay. My folded flag stained with their tears, we only had those few short years. The badge no longer on my chest, I sleep now in eternal rest. My sword I pass to those behind, and pray they keep this thought in mind. I never dreamt it would be me, and with heavy heart and bended knee, I ask for all here from the past, dear God, let my name be the last. And this poem was written by George Hahn, a retired officer with the Los Angeles Police Department. And I think, you know, in light of what's happened this week in Boston and in Waco, that's kind of a fitting, nice conclusion to our first stop. So, without further ado, let's move on to our second stop, and we're going to take a right here at the corner and walk along Madison to Baldomero Lopez Plaque. In the middle panel of your brochure is our next stop, and that is the Baldomero Lopez Plaque, which is where we are at. He is Tampa's first Medal of Honor winner, but let's set up some context first.
When the Korean War broke out, North Korean forces drove the entire length of the Korean Peninsula and pushed the U.S. UN forces into a very small pocket down at the southern end of Korea and tried very hard to drive them into the sea. Well, the answer for this was generated by Douglas MacArthur of World War II fame and became arguably MacArthur's finest moment. What MacArthur did was stage an amphibious landing of the type that they used in the Pacific during World War II. It's an amphibious landing at a place called Incheon. Okay, once the landing at Incheon, they could race across the Korean Peninsula, take Seoul, the capital, and cut off this entire North Korean army down in the south, almost winning the war at a single stroke and completely changing the cast of the war. It was after this that MacArthur sent the famous message to Truman saying the boys will be home by Christmas. That didn't happen for a number of reasons, but this was Incheon. Now what made Incheon more dangerous than a lot of the others were the tides, because the tide at Incheon has a 12-foot tidal surge, which means once these Marines were landed on the beach, the tide went out. And those Marines on the beach had to survive, had to stay alive for 12 hours until the tide came back in and they could be reinforced. So they're stuck on the beach with no help. And it was at one of these beaches, called Red Beach, that First Lieutenant Baldomero Lopez won the Medal of Honor in, sadly, the usual way. Because what happened was, when Baldomero Lopez, leading his men, went to throw a grenade at the enemy, he was shot repeatedly by an enemy machine gun, dropped the grenade, tried to pick it up to throw it, couldn't pick it up because he was shot and being shot. So what he did was take the grenade and cradle it and fall on top of it and absorb the entire blast of the grenade with his body, and saving his men and winning the Medal of Honor.
It is really this selfless nobility that exemplifies all the best qualities of a serviceman or woman. So thousands of miles away from home, Lieutenant Lopez saved his men, earned a spot in the first rank of heroes, a Medal of Honor winner, and gave Tampa at once an eternal favorite son of which to be proud and a debt of honor to remember. Now, Mr. Lopez was the first Medal of Honor winner for the city of Tampa, but he would become the second in 2006, which we'll discuss at our next stop. So, let's go ahead and walk a little more. Okay, so I brought you to, right behind me to my right, to my left, are the Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom Memorials. Something to keep in mind that we talked about since the beginning is that although war is political, the debt owed to soldiers and veterans is not. The sacrifice of the soldier is the same regardless of the war in which that individual serves. The stories of these twin monuments tell again is the simple, timeless story of selfless sacrifice, such as the story of Paul Ray Smith, Tampa's second Medal of Honor winner. In total disregard for his own life, he maintained his exposed position in order to engage the attacking enemy force. During this action, he was mortally wounded. His courageous actions helped defeat the enemy attack and resulted in as many as 50 enemy soldiers killed, while allowing the safe withdrawal of numerous wounded soldiers. Sergeant First Class Smith's extraordinary heroism and uncommon valor are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself, the 3rd Infantry Division, Rock of the Marne, and the United States Army. So the debt that society owes to the soldier is also the same. Debt of honor owed to all those who died in society's defense is so big and so basic that neither the politics around the war or even which war is that relevant to why we honor our heroes. We'll walk by Mr. Smith's name in just a few moments. Those who sacrificed their lives in Iraq and Afghanistan remembered and enshrined there, here, sacrificed every bit as much as their brothers in arms who created a tradition of selfless heroism in places like Belleau Wood, or the beaches of the Pacific, or the frozen Korea, or every other forbidding place far from home where U.S. soldiers have laid down their lives. And prompt action on the part of society underlines the sincerity of the sentiment with these particular memorials.
By being put up almost immediately. There is no way anyone going to Iraq or Afghanistan could have any question about whether or not there was going to be a memorial for them or a monument to them, because it was already there. Not everybody was in favor of the Iraq War. There were those that thought it was a bad idea. So war is political. War is always political, and people have very different ideas about what those politics should be. However, there's nothing political about honoring war dead. Well, war is political, sacrifice is not.
So let's take a quick look at, we'll just go down and around, and that way you guys have a chance to look at these specific memorials. And as I mentioned, Paul Ray Smith's name is on this particular monument over here, and it is designated with a little star that says Medal of Honor winner, posthumously awarded in 2000. One other thing, I think everybody is familiar with the Vietnam Memorial and how there is an ongoing dialogue between U.S. veterans and the Vietnam Memorial, where their names of those they lost are inscribed, and people come and they leave flowers and they leave wreaths and they leave mementos of their time served together. Well, anybody that looks for more than 2 seconds will notice right over there the wreath. This tradition that began at the Vietnam Memorial has now expanded and now moved into the present and moved into the future and moved into our current wars, and is this ongoing relationship and this ongoing dialogue between the people who live here and the people who are memorialized on that stone. Follow me. I brought you to... I brought you guys to the courthouse for a couple of memorials we're going to look at. I know we're going to be in the sun for just a little bit, but I promise you're going to like what I have to say. You haven't already. This is the Confederate memorial. It was erected in 1911. And every war memorial evokes memory of past wars, and these memories may have conflicted meanings. We've looked at 2 memorials so far that are a little bit different in nature. And so this memorial in particular has a more grand nature or more monumentality. It was moved to its current location from Old Hillsborough County Courthouse in 1952. Just as a site of reference, the old courthouse was where we were at when we saw the police memorial. So that used to be the old Hillsborough County Courthouse. When that was torn down, and this was the one that was built behind me in 1952, they moved this monument with the new one. So what I'm standing on is actually marble base, and the obelisk and the soldiers are carved of granite. You'll notice the high-rising obelisk. This is a monument or a kind of architectural style stolen from, well not stolen, but appropriated from ancient Egypt. And what it does in its symbolism is represents a commemoration of death. Now what's really unique about this particular memorial are the 2 soldiers that flank both sides, and there's a reason why they're facing the way they are and the way they look. On the north side of the memorial, if you guys want to come around, you can, or you can see it when we walk past. The one facing north is in defiance, and the one facing south on that side is in defeat. On the north side, marching north to battle, is a young Confederate soldier who is confident in his mission and well-equipped in a walking crowd. This soldier sports a wide-brimmed hat, he's fully equipped, he has a blanket roll, and his musket is at his shoulder. He's confident, he's going off to war. The soldier on the other side, on the south side, is a soldier returning home. His hat is in hand, his head is bandaged, his uniform is tattered, and he's using his musket as a cane or a walking stick. And it's really interesting with Confederate memorials. If you visit any other Confederate memorials anywhere in the South, they always have a soldier facing north, and this is to symbolize heading off to battle. And if they decide to place a soldier on the south side, it will look like this type of soldier that we see here, bandaged up, bloodied, bruised, returning south and returning home. Now the soldier I want to focus on is the south one for just a couple of seconds. This is a commemoration of the lost cause. And the lost cause is a Southern school of thought that argued the Civil War was a noble struggle by the Confederacy to preserve a unique way of life against the overwhelming power of the North. This tradition provided justification for the Confederate action and sought redemption in the defeat of the South.
An attempt to seize what is called the contested terrain of historical interpretation. How do people remember the event? Things like this are an attempt to shape how people remember the event, and as is the lost cause.
And what the individuals, the UDC individuals, were trying to commemorate was this lost cause. And for the UDC and the generation that constructed many memorials like this throughout Southern courthouses, these Confederate memorials, their aim was to remember a lost cause and a commemorative nature. They're very unique and a very loaded meaning and message within this particular monument. But what I want to do now is take you across the plaza to the other side. We're going to look at a very different type of a memorial too. Built in 1911. The next one we're going to look at was built in 1986. It is on the back left panel of your brochure, and it is known as the Gold Star War Memorial.
This is called the Gold Star Memorial. It was constructed in the early mid-'80s. It was placed here by the Hillsborough County Historical Commission that eventually turned into the Genealogical and Historical Library in that building right behind you. It remembers all of those who died in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And it was placed here and commissioned in association with the publication of a book called the Gold Star Memorial Registry that was published by the Hillsborough County Department of Administrative Services in 1986.
The Gold Star Registry was a book that published every single name of every person that was killed in battle during those wars. It's a very inclusive, very democratic memorial in that it enshrines the memory of all those who served in these wars and thus equalizes their importance in memory. There's equal equality and sacrifice, so there's no single honor, whether it was in the Argonne Forest or World War I, Normandy with World War II, Seoul in South Korea, or Saigon in Vietnam, that no single war or no single individual is greater than the whole. And this particular monument covers all those people in places that don't have their own monument, and those who lost their lives in battles in places that do not have their own dedicated memorial and whose service is thus in danger of being forgotten in official memory. Okay, let's go take one more stop here at the courthouse, and then we will move on to Digression Street, which is a little more shaded. This is this is actually an interesting question. I'm glad you asked. This monument behind us, and this part right here, was erected in, I think, the late 90s, and it was designed and developed and erected by the Water Department. So it has nothing to do with our war memorial. It's a separate memorial or separate statuary piece of public art that's outside of the war memorial. So, yeah, no symbolism or meaning to what we're talking about today. It's a nice piece of public art.
I thought.
Yeah, it's another tour.
I thought that looked like a bunch of plumbing stuff.
On this wall, we have a plaque remembering John F. Kennedy, who stood on this spot and gave a speech about foreign relations with Latin America.
The story of the Kennedy presidency is the stuff of myth, the heroic young president, war veteran, greatest possible international danger in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and of course the seething plots and treachery associated with the assassination. His visit here, and he came here I think a number of times. He came here I think to Tampa at least 3 to 4 times. One of his last visits was 4 days before he was killed in Dallas.
So this says so much about Kennedy's relationship with Tampa, okay? Because now, what's going on while Kennedy is president, especially that would be of interest to the Tampa Cuban community?
We had Pig's invasion in 1961, which was a failed attempt to oust Castro, and of course the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962 was one of his favorite remonstrances.
There's a very large, very secret war, very violent war going on between the U.S. Special Services and the Cuban government at the time to try to overthrow Castro. They're trying to overthrow him. They're trying to subvert him. They're trying to kill him. They're trying to do whatever they can do to get rid of Castro.
This plaque here, it marks the spot where he actually spoke to a group of about 10,000 people on Latin American foreign policy.
Not long after he was assassinated, Lafayette Street out here was changed to Kennedy Boulevard. However, this did not come after he was assassinated. I think, and it goes to the very heart of Tampa's relationship with Kennedy, that this plaque was placed here before he was assassinated. This plaque was placed here not long after he visited here. Tampa always has had an enduring affection for Kennedy. He liked the city. He spent a lot of time here, and Tampa responded to that long before it became fashionable to do so. Okay? There was not a Kennedy Airport before Kennedy was assassinated, but there was a Kennedy Memorial Plaque in Tampa before he was assassinated. And so Tampa claimed a little bit of this legacy and a little bit of this story and a little bit of this history for itself. That is not, however, the whole story. Because one of the things that Roosevelt said about the Rough Riders later on was that it was very difficult to tell who really won the battle at San Juan Hill. I'm paraphrasing, but said who really won the battle of San Juan Hill? Was it the Rough Riders or was it the Buffalo Soldiers? He was of the opinion that you could not really tell. The Buffalo Soldiers have a memorial up in Tampa Heights, but as they were part of the mission that's being remembered here, we're going to talk about them as well. The Buffalo Soldiers were the first full-time African-American units in the U.S. Army. They were put together after the Civil War as the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry Regiments. They were mustered. They won numerous awards fighting in the wars of expansion out west against the Native Americans, and in fact that's where they got the name. A name of respect from the Comanches who had been fighting them and treated them with respect, and who the Buffalo Soldiers also respected.
While stationed here in Tampa, the American Buffalo Soldiers fostered pride among local blacks while encountering hostilities in Tampa. On the eve of the Army's embarkation for Cuba, Tampa was the scene of a serious clash between the black and white troops. According to historian Dennis Halpin, on June 6, 1898, a race riot erupted when white troops decided to use, and this is kind of horrific, decided to use an African-American child for target practice. Although the child was unharmed, African-American soldiers were incensed over the incident. That evening, both white and black troops, so white troops sympathetic with Buffalo Soldiers, rioted in the streets of Ybor City and Tampa. This was not the only major incident during their stay in Tampa. The Buffalo Soldiers continued to face segregation and discrimination. This was still the Jim Crow South.
This is a very sad commentary on relations at the time, and a very sad kind of symbol of what was to come over a very long period of racial strife to end the segregation. The services would finally be desegregated in 1947 by Harry Truman. The Buffalo Soldiers are remembered to this day for their role in doing so.
However, despite all these hostilities, despite the discrimination, despite the segregation, the Buffalo Soldiers actually earned 5 medals of honor for their participation in the Spanish-American War at San Juan Hill, alongside Roosevelt's Cavalry Regiment, and then at El Caney, which was a separate battle within the Spanish-American War. So this plaque gives us a little bit of a small piece of that larger context, the Spanish-American War. Tampa plays a small role in the Buffalo Soldiers as well as Roosevelt's Rough Riders embarked from Tampa for their service in Cuba.
And now we're going to move right over here to the MIA flag. This was placed here February 19th, 1987 by Michelle and Dana Twan. They were the wife and daughter of an Air Force navigator named Michael Twan that was shot down over Vietnam in 1965. His remains would not return to the family for 20 years until 1985. And this goes to kind of the heart of what this memorial means. I was telling you over there how this deal is struck between societies and the people who serve them to remember and enshrine and memorialize. That becomes problematic when you're talking about MIAs and POWs to which you don't know their fate. You don't know what they did. You don't know what happened to them. They just disappeared. So what do you remember? What you remember is that they are lost. What you remember is that though you do not know the details of the sacrifice, what you can be sure of is that the sacrifice was every bit as big and every bit as complete and every bit as total in some dark place far from home as everybody that we do know and everyone that we memorialize. It goes to the heart of that deal. How does the society honor the bargain it has made with the people that serve it if it doesn't know the details? What if it bypasses that problem? The details don't matter. The sacrifice is every big. The sacrifice is every bit as profound, and it will be remembered regardless of whether we know the details or not. Okay, now we're going to head back across the street and talk about a true local legend. here in memoriam of a man that I'm going to pronounce his name correctly just so you'll hear it. His name was Frank Adamo. However, everybody in Tampa knows him as Frank Adamo because a 7-mile stretch of Highway 60 right out here is named in his honor. And the reason it is named in his honor goes something like this.
And shortly after Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Army invaded the Philippines, which was a U.S. colony at the time. After a 3-month battle in which cut-off U.S. forces held out in the fortress of Corregidor, Douglas MacArthur, who we encountered with Inchon, was ordered to escape and made this famous proclamation, "I shall return." Surrounded without supplies, approximately 70,000 U.S. and Filipino soldiers were taken prisoner by the Japanese, including U.S. Army Doctor Lieutenant Colonel Frank Adamo.
This was far more than the Japanese knew what to do with, so they decided to march them to a prison camp 60 miles away. This is the beginning of the Bataan Death March, one of the most ghastly war crimes ever committed against Americans anywhere. Approximately 1/3 of these men that set out for this prison camp would be killed en route, either by bayoneting or beheading or shooting.
The survivors were crowded into squalid camps and worked severely. Food was scarce, medical care non-existent, and disease rife.
And what he did in this horrible septic jungle environment was, what he did was to come up with a new treatment for gangrene. Gangrene was rampant in these prison camps, leading to thousands of amputations and deaths. So what Frank Adamo did, in this Japanese prison camp in the jungle, using one of the very few chemicals he had, hydrogen peroxide, what he did was come up with a new way to treat gas gangrene, which saved thousands of limbs and, drastically improved the quality of life for a lot of the people that did survive.
There's kind of a beautiful irony in this narrative that amid the suffering and death of war, the heroic deed memorialized here is not an act of hopeless self-sacrifice or exceptional heroism in battle, but rather the act of saving lives. By his work in the worst of circumstances, Frank Adamo literally returned life and limb to people. Amid war, he gave life, and that may be the most remarkable thing about this plaque, apart from the heroic narrative, the values it represents, like empathy and humanism, amidst the bad suffering of World War II. All right, let's go on to our last stop at Gaslight Park, wrap up with some closing remarks, and then that will be the end of the tour. As we noted at the beginning, service memorial is among the most constant and unchanging forms of all public art. This familiarity makes it possible to walk past and only barely notice them, yet, due to their role in honoring the contract between societies and those who serve, they are among the most important and noteworthy forms of public art. These monuments and memorials speak for the society and therefore for the people of the society who are protected by those who sacrifice. This sacrifice and the continuing sacrifices of the families and loved ones of those who are lost in the service is the real meaning of these memorials, and the guarantee to those called in the future that their society will pay the debt of honor that is owed to them. So on behalf of the Downtown Partnership, Due to Locomotion, and the USF History Department, we'd like to thank you for your attendance and participation in this walk. Remember, next week, on the 26th, is another walk, which is Frontier Tampa. That kind of wraps up USF's participation in these walks. But again, I want to thank you all for braving the heat, humidity, and traffic, and everything else. I've really enjoyed having you guys as an audience. Hopefully you've enjoyed this too. And again, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Excellent.
That was over there by that